History 1. This happened just a few weeks back, on a regular evening when I decided to head over to Target around 8 p.m. I only needed to pick up a few items. Upon entering the store, everything seemed pretty usual. It wasn't too crowded, nor was it empty. Without wasting any time, I began walking to the right side where I needed to get some soap. As I walked down the aisle, I noticed a man coming from the opposite direction, wearing a shirt that said, VJNJ Mammal, DJKJ. It caught my eye for a moment, but I didn't think much of it and kept moving. After grabbing the soap, I headed towards the back of the store to get the remaining items on my list. It took me a little over 5 minutes. When I started making my way back to the front, I noticed that the area was unusually quiet, except for one person who caught my attention. It was the same man from earlier, standing in an aisle and deliberately pushing items off the shelves. He had slightly long dark hair, was somewhat large, and stood just under 6 feet tall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself stopping near him. He glanced at me as he continued his disruptive behavior. I asked him what he was doing, not in an accusing manner, just genuinely curious. He looked at me briefly but didn't stop what he was doing. Then without a word, he looked away and ignored me completely. I glanced around, but there were no employees in sight. When I looked back at him, he gave me the middle finger. I thought about saying something but decided it wasn't worth it. I figured someone would notice soon and he'd get kicked out or banned from the store. I walked over to the self-checkout, paid for my items, and started to leave. As I stepped into the parking lot, I glanced back and saw the man following me from about 50 feet away. It was odd, but I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. However, when I reached my car and unlocked it, I saw him standing right behind my car, staring at me through the rear window. I waited for about a minute, hoping he would move, but he didn't budge. I rolled down my window and yelled at him to move. He ignored me, just standing there with an almost blank expression. This guy was really starting to confuse me. I honked my horn, but he still didn't move. Frustrated, I turned off my engine and got out of the car. He still didn't move, nor did he respond when I asked what his problem was. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to walk back into Target. He followed me, keeping about 10 feet behind. When I got inside, I saw a few employees near the self-checkout area. The man tried to walk past them, but one of the employees confronted him, while another stepped in front of him. I overheard them questioning him about throwing items off the shelves. Taking advantage of the distraction, I quickly left the store, and this time he couldn't even follow me. I haven't seen him since. Hopefully they banned him or something. His behavior was completely baffling, almost as if he just wanted to cause trouble. History 2. When I was 16, I got my first job working at a Target, which was about 10 minutes away from my parents' house where I lived back then. I was in high school and would work there after school and on weekends. The job wasn't too bad and I had some good memories, but I never had to deal with anything quite as strange as what happened that night. After classes were over or on weekends, I didn't have a car, so my parents drove me to and from work. I was hoping to save enough from my Target job to buy a car eventually. A couple of months into the job, I had a shift starting at 4 p.m. and ending at 9 p.m. I was a cashier, spending my entire shift at the check lanes. Things went as usual, with only about 2 hours of busyness. That night, I got off a bit early, around 8:45 p.m. since the store was quiet. My manager told me I could leave, so I clocked out and texted my mom to let her know. She replied quickly, saying she would come to pick me up. I walked out and sat on a bench near the entrance, waiting for her. It was a quiet evening, with occasional customers coming and going. There were many cars in the parking lot, belonging to both employees and customers. I noticed an older, larger SUV driving around the lot. It passed by the entrance and circled back again, moving slowly. This time it stopped right in front of me. I had a bad feeling about it, but I was mostly confused. The passenger side window rolled down, and I saw a man in the driver's seat looking at me. He yelled, asking if I needed a ride, saying he could drive me home or wherever I was going. I shook my head and told him no, thanks. He had dark, long hair and wore a baseball cap. He insisted that I should go with him, waving me over. I refused again, but the man didn't leave. After a few moments, he opened his door and started walking around the car towards me. He was moving fast, and I quickly got up and ran to the entrance of Target. I made it inside within seconds and looked back to see he hadn't followed me. I stayed inside, sitting on a bench until my mom texted that she had arrived. She got there about 5 minutes later, and I walked out to her car, feeling much better once I was inside. I told her what happened, and we looked around. I saw the same SUV parked with the engine running. We left without being followed. When we got home, I called my boss to report the incident. I never saw the guy again, and nothing like that happened for the rest of the time I worked there. History 3. For a little background, I'm a woman living close to several Targets, but I usually went to the nearest one. I'd shop there about once a week for groceries and other essentials because of the good prices. The store closed at 11 p.m., so I'd work with customers for about an hour, though there were generally very few of them at that hour. Our location was one of the quieter Targets, always hiring and often a bit short-staffed. I imagine other Targets had more employees than we did. One night I started my shift at 10 p.m., stocking shelves in the grocery area. Around midnight I was alone in one of the back grocery aisles. It was mostly quiet, but suddenly I heard something fall from the top shelf in the next aisle. I thought it was odd and stopped to check it out, assuming a coworker was nearby. When I walked around the corner, I didn't see anyone. I went back to work, continuing for about 10 minutes without incident. Then out of nowhere, I saw a man pass by my aisle. He didn't look like an employee, and I only caught a glimpse of him. Curious, I walked over and saw him disappearing into another aisle. I called out asking who was there, but got no response. Determined to find out who it was, I walked into the aisle he had entered. It was strange. I didn't hear him leave, and I was sure he was still there. I kept looking and then spotted him hiding on the bottom shelf, covered by boxes, with just his head peeking out. It was a bizarre sight. I should have gone straight to my boss, but I decided to ask the man what he was doing. He didn't move or respond. I told him the store was closed and he had to leave, but he remained hidden. Realizing he wasn't going to budge, I left to find my boss. I explained the situation and we both returned to the aisle. Just in time, we saw the man sprinting away. We briefly followed, but he was fast. My boss assured me it would be handled and radioed someone as I went back to work. For the next hour and a half, I continued stocking shelves. Then I heard someone approaching. Expecting a coworker, I turned around and saw the same guy. He startled me, and I immediately started running. It was the only thing I could think to do. The man chased me through several aisles until I found another coworker. Seeing us, the man diverted and ran in another direction. The police were called, and we were evacuated from the store. They arrived and caught the man after about 10 minutes. Somehow, he had managed to stay hidden for hours, moving around unnoticed. His intentions were unclear, but it was a creepy experience. I'm glad I spotted him when I did. Not too long ago, I had another bizarre experience after shopping at Target. It was a normal afternoon, and I was doing some grocery shopping at the Target about 10 minutes from my house. The store was busy, and I was in one of the grocery aisles when a man started talking to me. He was about 5'8", bald, and wore glasses. He greeted me and asked what I was shopping for. It seemed strange since he didn't work there and people don't usually strike up conversations in the store. His manner was friendly but odd. I said I was just getting some groceries and tried to move on, but he kept talking. I was doing some grocery shopping and was almost done when this guy struck up a conversation with me. He kept it going for a bit, asking if I was heading home after, and I said yes. That question seemed a bit odd, but then he started talking about all the things he still needed to buy. I figured he was just being friendly, so I didn't mind the awkward chat. It only lasted a couple of minutes before I told him I was going to check out and said bye. He said bye too and walked in another direction. I headed over to the self-checkout area and started scanning my items. It was pretty busy, with every register occupied and a line forming. As I was finishing up, I noticed the same guy in line to check out, which seemed odd since he'd said he had more shopping to do. I didn't think too much of it and finished checking out. After leaving the store, I loaded my groceries into my car and drove home, which took about 10 minutes. I went inside and put everything away. About 5 minutes later, I looked out the large front window in my dining room, which faces the driveway and the street. I saw a car driving down the street, which isn't unusual since it's a quiet neighborhood and cars don't pass by constantly. But then, to my surprise, the car turned into my driveway. I was confused, having no idea who it could be. The car parked, and I watched as the door opened. To my shock, it was the same guy from Target. He walked up my driveway to my front door. I quickly ducked down, unsure if he saw me. He knocked on the door, but I didn't answer. I was too creeped out. He knocked again, and I stayed hidden. After about 5 minutes of silence, I cautiously got up and saw he wasn't at the door anymore. But then I noticed him at another front window looking in. I ran out of the room, ready to call the police if he tried to break in. A few minutes later, I checked again, and he was gone, along with his car. I felt a huge sense of relief. I haven't seen him since. I have no idea how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me without me noticing. I'm just glad he didn't try to break in. Why he came to my house in the first place is still a mystery to me.